If you're feeling inspired by this story of overcoming and transformation, be sure to subscribe to our channel to receive more exciting stories like this one. Each chapter is a new journey, and we want you to be a part of this experience. Click the subscribe button now and embark with us on stories of courage, challenges, and redemption. Don't miss the next adventure. It might be even more surprising than you imagine. The soft afternoon light filtered through the large window of the funeral parlor, illuminating the room with a pale glow, as if the space itself were in mourning. The dark wooden coffin lay in the center of the room, surrounded by white floral arrangements, a tangle of roses and lilies, as delicate as the memory of the departed. People whispered amongst themselves, some with sad faces, others with masks of respect. It was a heavy day, but the atmosphere was far from warm. Only one person seemed unconcerned by the sad scene around them: Adrian Wolf. He was the CEO of Wolf Industries, one of the most powerful corporations in the country. He stood there, observing the crowd as if assessing the situation like a business transaction. His cold, calculating eyes scanned people's faces, but nothing there seemed to truly affect him. His presence was dominant, like a predator who knew everyone was in his orbit, though few dared to look him in the eye. Adrian kept his distance, his posture rigid and his expression blank. He seemed to blend into the scene as if he were a piece of luxury furniture, oblivious to the pain of the place. It was difficult to tell what he was really thinking. He didn't seem concerned about his ex-girlfriend's funeral, nor about the loss of his mother. Cinderella Thompson, the woman he had manipulated and tried to control for years. Deep down, perhaps, he saw this moment as an opportunity, a chance to adjust the course of his life, something he had always been calculating. Cinderella, she, on the other hand, was in a state of desolation, her face pale, her eyes red from crying so much she couldn't stop staring at the coffin. Her mother, the woman who raised and supported her in a world where everyone seemed to have an opinion about who she should be, was now there, so quiet, so distant. People were there only out of formality, offering words of comfort that seemed empty. But for her, none of that mattered. Nothing would ever be the same again. It was difficult for Cinderella to understand how something as simple as death could trigger something so chaotic in her life. After all, she and Adrian had separated months before, but the scars of their relationship were still there, visible to her and everyone around her. He had been a man of subtle manipulations, sharp words, and deep down, he always made her feel like she was part of a bigger plan, something she didn't control, something being directed by invisible hands. The contrast between her and Adrian had never been clearer than at that moment. She, a woman with an open heart and exposed emotions, and he, a man of calculated coldness. It was a relationship built in the shadows, where he always seemed to be the guide, and she, the follower. An obsession. And when obsession grows too much, no matter how much you try to distance yourself, control will be regained without you even noticing. Adrian couldn't take his eyes off Cinderella. There was something about her that drew him uncontrollably in. It wasn't just the grief, the momentary fragility he saw. There was something deeper, something he had never been able to control. Perhaps it was the fact that she was the only person he couldn't dominate. Even after all the years together, he had never completely had her under his power. She had distanced herself from him, but he knew she still needed him, somehow. And as she continued her journey of grief, he watched patiently, like a hunter in wait. As the hours passed and people dispersed, Cinderella was alone, head down, arms hugging her body, trying to stay upright while dealing with the inner pain. She didn't know what to do with the amount of conflicting feelings that overwhelmed her. It was as if the weight of the loss merged with the weight of the toxic relationship she was trying to leave behind, but which, deep down, always came back to haunt her. She couldn't escape Adrian. The wind that streamed in through the open windows made the curtains move slightly, creating shadows that danced across the walls. That's when Adrian approached her. There was no one else around, just the two of them, in the heavy silence of unspoken grief. Adrian looked at Cinderella with a slight smile, a smile of someone who knows he always has the last word, that he always gets what he wants, even when the world seems to be against him. "Everything's all right, Cinderella," he said, his voice soft and controlled, but with an underlying message of something more, something she still couldn't fully understand. Without waiting for an answer, he pulled her close and in a swift movement kissed her. She was paralyzed, unsure how to react. It was as if her body was in a state of shock, unable to react. The kiss wasn't a demonstration of affection. It was an attempt to regain control. The manipulation had returned. The kiss wasn't long, but it was enough to make Cinderella feel the world crumble around her. It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It wasn't a gesture of love. It was confirmation that, however much she wanted to distance herself, Adrian still controlled her. He had the power to make her feel small again. She, who always tried to find the strength to be independent, now found herself back at square one. That moment was a cruel reminder of how lost she had become. As he turned away, their eyes met. Adrian smiled slightly, as if he had just completed an important transaction. Cinderella, still stunned, didn't know what to do. Her hands trembled as she tried to regain her composure. She wanted to scream, to run, but she knew she had nowhere to go. Adrian Wolfe was born into a world of power and privilege, where expectations were clear from the very beginning. The only son of a renowned businessman, he was molded to be the leader of his family and the corporation that bore his surname. From an early age, his sharp intelligence and relentless ambition placed him in a prominent position, but also distanced him from people. For him, feelings were something to be analyzed and manipulated, not something to be experienced genuinely. When he met Cinderella, she was a breath of fresh air in his meticulously planned life. She wasn't interested in his money, his power, or his fame. Cinderella was a simple woman, with an innocent look that attracted Adrian in a way he couldn't explain. It was a challenge for him. For her, Adrian was the antithesis of everything she had ever known. He was cold, calculating, and in a strange way, his behavior only made her feel more and more drawn to him. The relationship began almost imperceptibly, like a silent power dance, with Adrian always taking the reins. Over the years, his obsession with Cinderella grew, but she didn't realize it immediately. He manipulated her so subtly that she genuinely believed she loved him. But there was something unhealthy about her adoration. Adrian enjoyed controlling her every step, every movement, every thought. Cinderella Thompson was born in a small town in rural California. Raised by a mother who always taught her to be independent, she believed that true love was based on respect and equality. She was always the girl who questioned conventions and strived to find her own path. Her life was simple, but full of small joys. Afternoons in the park, sincere conversations with friends, and a constant search for something that made her feel alive. When Adrian entered her life, she was in university and, like many young people, believed in idealized romance. But she soon began to realize that Adrian wasn't who he seemed. His coldness, his need for control, all of that became more evident. However, she felt drawn to him in an inexplicable way, as if she were being pulled by something beyond her control. Cinderella was vulnerable, and Adrian knew exactly how to exploit that. The story of Cinderella and Adrian couldn't have taken place just anywhere. USA, with its multifaceted and complex society, it offers the perfect backdrop for this plot. The pursuit of freedom and the unbridled consumption of power are recurring themes in this context. In Adrian's world, everything was about status, results, and control, reflecting the ruthless mentality of corporate capitalism. On the other hand, Cinderella comes from a more humble background, where family values and the simplicity of a life without luxury offered a different kind of happiness. She always believed that good things came from honesty, hard work, and genuine connection with people. For her, the relationship with Adrian was a true contradiction. In the United States, especially in large cities, people often hide behind facades of success and perfection. Adrian represents this toxic model of success, a man who has everything but still desires more. Cinderella, with her sincerity and fragility, reflects the internal struggle of many people who seek to escape social pressure but end up succumbing to the demands of a life they did not choose. The clash between these two worlds, the corporate and the personal, creates constant tension throughout the story, where each character finds themselves challenged by their own ideals and expectations. Adrian, he seeks control, power, and a woman who can be molded to his liking, while Cinderella, she craves freedom and authenticity, but is seduced by the idea of a deep love that is, in reality, an emotional trap. While the pain of losing her mother was still fresh, Cinderella found herself trapped in a web of conflicting feelings. She loved Adrian, but she also feared him. His obsession suffocated her, but at the same time, she felt lost without him. It was as if her identity was tied to this man who controlled her, who made her doubt her own decisions. She knew she needed to get away, but she couldn't. The emotional manipulation she had suffered for years left her bewildered, unable to distinguish between truth and lies. She sometimes wondered if she would ever find a way to completely escape Adrian's shadow. But his obsession with her seemed stronger than anything she could do. The more she tried to distance herself, the closer he got. And that kiss at the wake, was proof that he wouldn't let her go easily. After the wake, Cinderella thought that perhaps she would finally have room to breathe. Her mother's death had been a brutal blow, but it was also a sign that perhaps she could find a way to move on, free from Adrian's manipulation. She moved into a small apartment in Los Angeles, trying to start a new life away from the shadows of her relationship with him. But, as if by an invisible force, Adrian soon returned. In the first few days, he started showing up at her work, sending messages disguised as concern. With each encounter he seemed calmer, more in control, as if he were getting used to the idea of being a spectator in her life instead of being in charge. But Cinderella knew it was only a matter of time before he would take control again. "I just want to help you get through this, Cinderella," he said in a soft voice, full of apparent empathy. But Cinderella couldn't ignore what she knew to be true. He wanted control, not her happiness. Adrian knew how to play the psychological game, and he was beginning to become a master at it. Cinderella found herself once again in an emotional battle against him. Whenever she began to feel that she was getting stronger, that she could be independent, he pulled her back into the abyss with gestures of kindness disguised as self-interest. He would show up at her apartment unannounced, bringing flowers or small gifts, things she used to love. But now she saw it all differently. He wasn't there to show affection. He was there to ensure she would never be able to get rid of him. Each gift, each gesture, each visit was a way of affirming his presence in her life, of guaranteeing that, even if she tried to distance herself, he would be a part of her existence, a constant shadow. Cinderella knew what was happening, but the weight of her emotional dependence blinded her. She wanted to believe she could change, that she could go back to being the independent woman she had always been. But she was trapped in a cycle of guilt and confusion. When he spoke, he seemed so sincere, so concerned about her. But deep down, she knew Adrian would never treat her as an equal. He saw her as an object, a piece in his grand game. Determined to cut ties with Adrian, Cinderella sought therapy. For the first time in years, she sought to understand what bound her so strongly to him, what prevented her from breaking free from this obsession. But each session, each conversation with the therapist seemed to put more pressure on her. What she discovered about herself was not comforting. She realized that at some point, Her desire to please Adrian had become part of her identity. The search for approval, the search for validation that never came. This made her realize that she was not only in a toxic relationship with Adrian, but also with herself. The therapist suggested that she completely distance herself from Adrian, that she cut off all contact. Cinderella knew this would be the hardest thing to do, but also the most necessary. She began taking steps to protect herself from Adrian. She blocked him on social media, stopped answering his calls, and avoided any situation where he might appear. But Adrian wasn't going to give up so easily. Every move Cinderella made to distance herself from him fueled his obsession. He started showing up near her workplace, at the cafe she frequented, even in front of her apartment. He didn't need an explanation. He knew exactly where she was. For him, what mattered wasn't what she wanted, but what he could control. In one of their chance encounters, Cinderella tried to be firm. "Adrian, please, you need to understand. I don't want this anymore. I'm trying to move on." She spoke, trying to keep her voice steady, but the pressure in her chest was so great that she could barely breathe. Adrian looked at her with a calm, composed expression. "I know you still love me, Cinderella," he said with a chilling gentleness. "You're just scared. But deep down, you know you need me. I'm the only person who truly understands you." Cinderella felt a deep pain in her stomach. He was right about some things. For years, she had believed that he understood her better than anyone else, but that understanding was a prison, a careful manipulation of every aspect of her life, until she began to doubt her own ability to decide. "No, Adrian," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "You used me, controlled me, and made me believe things that weren't real." But Adrian just smiled, an empty smile. "You'll understand, Cinderella. I'll always be here, by your side, waiting." She took a step back, feeling the weight of his words. He was right about one thing. He would never let her go. Sarah, a longtime friend of Cinderella's, began to notice the change in her friend. Cinderella was no longer the same. The sparkle in her eyes, the confidence that once characterized her, were beginning to fade. Sarah, a practical and pragmatic woman, had always been the opposite of Cinderella in many ways, more skeptical, more rational, and with a clear vision of what constituted a healthy relationship. Noticing how much Cinderella was affected by Adrian, Sarah began to intervene. She had heard about Adrian's manipulative nature, but never imagined how deeply he had infiltrated her friend's life. In a frank conversation, Sarah confronted Cinderella, trying to make her see what was happening. "Don't you realize, Cinderella? He controls you, makes you believe you can't live without him. This isn't love, this is obsession. You need to get away from him before it's too late." Cinderella, shaken, still couldn't see the situation clearly. "I know what's happening, Sarah, but it's harder than it seems. I don't know what to do." Sarah felt her friend's pain, but didn't know how to help her without Cinderella making a decision for herself. She didn't want to be just a spectator, but she couldn't force her friend to take such a radical step. Deep down, Sarah feared that if Cinderella didn't break free from Adrian soon, she would never be the same again. Daniel, Cinderella's ex-boyfriend before Adrian, unexpectedly reappeared in her life. He had learned of her mother's death and wanted to comfort her, but what he truly desired was to reconnect with the woman he still loved. Their relationship had ended abruptly, but the love between them hadn't completely disappeared. He knew of Cinderella's relationship with Adrian and had serious reservations about the nature of their bond. Daniel knew she was being consumed by Adrian and wanted to help her, but he didn't want to force anything. He met her at a cafe on a cold morning and tried to be kind. "I know you're going through a lot, Cinderella. I don't want to pressure you, but you have to understand that you can count on me. It's not too late to start over. You can break free from him." Cinderella looked at him with a sad smile, still carrying the weight of her confusion. "I want to believe, Daniel, but everything seems so complicated now. Adrian won't just let me go. He never does that. Daniel, frustrated, felt a mixture of anger and compassion. He knew Cinderella had been strong before meeting Adrian, and he wanted her to find that strength again. However, the emotional bond with Adrian seemed unbreakable, and Daniel didn't know to what extent he could help her. The pressure on Cinderella came not only from Adrian, but also from her own family. After her mother's death, she found herself with a new burden: her family's expectations of what she should do with her life. Her mother had always believed that Cinderella would achieve something great, but without knowing that she was involved in such a destructive relationship. Now, the demand for her to be strong and overcome the pain of loss rested on her shoulders, while she still struggled against Adrian's control. "You need to move on, darling," her aunt said, in a voice that hid no dissent. "Your mother would be very sad to know that you're letting a man dominate you like this. You have so much potential, Cinderella. Don't let him ruin you." These words echoed in Cinderella's mind, but her response was a feeling of emptiness. How could she move on if she didn't know where to begin? The pressure of being the daughter who overcomes her mother's loss, the strong woman everyone expected her to be, only made her feel more lost. She knew she was disappointing her mother, but at the same time, Adrian's presence in her life seemed almost inevitable. One night, after yet another unsolicited visit from Adrian, Cinderella reached a breaking point. She was emotionally exhausted, feeling like she was being pushed towards an abyss, with no control over what was happening in her life. After a long day at work and arguments with Sarah and Daniel, she sat in her room, alone, looking out the window and reflecting on everything she had lost. It was at that moment that something inside her began to change. She could no longer continue hiding in Adrian's shadow. She could no longer allow herself to be manipulated by him. What he wanted no longer mattered. She needed to rediscover herself. Cinderella took a deep breath and made a decision. She didn't know exactly how she would do it, but she knew she could no longer live to please everyone around her. She could no longer be the woman Adrian wanted her to be. She needed to be who she truly was, without more manipulation, without more lies. It was a cold winter afternoon when the turning point occurred. Cinderella was in a local bookstore, trying to lose herself among the bookshelves as a way to escape the chaotic life unfolding before her. She needed something to calm her mind, to forget the constant pressure from Adrian, who always seemed to be lurking nearby. She was distractedly flipping through the pages of a novel when a book slipped from the shelf and fell to the floor. As she bent down to pick it up, her eyes met those of someone unexpected. It was Adrian, once again, silently, as if drawn by her presence. He stood there, looking at her with the same enigmatic expression as always, as if he knew more than he should. "Are you running away from me, Cinderella?" His voice sounded calm, but there was something behind it, as if he knew that something was about to change. Cinderella, who for a moment thought she would find him in a neutral place, was overcome by a feeling of dread. Her reaction was instantaneous. "Why are you here, Adrian?" He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who already knew the answer. He had infiltrated her life again, and this time he didn't seem willing to let her go so easily. "I found you where you least expected it," he said, in a tone that sounded more like a threat than a casual statement. "You can't run away from me, Cinderella, you know that, don't you?" But it was there, at that moment, that the manipulation game took an unexpected turn. During an exchange of cold words, Adrian made a revelation that Cinderella could never have foreseen. In an attempt to reassert his power over her, he began to talk about their past, something Cinderella had never fully known. "Do you really think you pushed me out of your life?" Adrian asked, his voice almost somber. "You never knew everything, Cinderella. You never knew how much my presence in your life was always part of what you wanted. Always. I know everything. Don't think you can hide anything from me." Cinderella, astonished, looked at him, uncomprehending. But he continued, "Do you think I didn't notice what you did? When we drifted apart, you started hiding me, hiding our history. But you always knew you couldn't push me away because deep down you never wanted to." It was at that moment that Cinderella realized the depth of Adrian's obsession with her. But it was also at that moment that Adrian revealed something he had kept hidden all along. During the time they were together, he had installed hidden cameras in her apartment, knew her every move, and even what she bought or did in private moments. "I know everything about you, Cinderella. Every thought, every gesture," he said, revealing a secret that had been hidden beneath the facade of a controlled and careful love. Cinderella froze. She was in shock. Everything she believed to be a simple relationship of control was, in fact, something much darker. Adrian didn't just want to dominate her. He wanted to control every part of your existence, as if it were a piece in his grand game. The revelation was a direct blow to Cinderella's heart. She felt as if the ground had disappeared from beneath her feet. She tried to pull away from him, but he held her arm. "It's no use, Cinderella. You've always been mine, and now you can't escape." "You're a monster," she whispered, but fear couldn't hide the anger building inside her. She finally understood what he had done. He didn't love her. He didn't want her as a partner. He wanted to possess her, control her until her last breath. And there, in that moment of rupture, she felt something change inside her. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. She was furious. He had invaded her privacy, her space, her life. But he had also shown himself vulnerable, and Cinderella now had the power to make a decision. As she tried to distance herself from him, Cinderella felt an unknown force rising within her. She knew she could no longer live under Adrian's control. But at that moment, a new revelation came to her mind. Adrian was so blinded by his obsession with her that he hadn't realized she was now controlling him, even unintentionally. That's when Cinderella took a bold and unexpected step. She finally confronted Adrian not as the victim, but as the woman who now knew what she needed to do. "You will pay for everything you've done," she said, her voice firm, unlike all the times she had wavered. Adrian, surprised, tried to react, but the control he thought he had over Cinderella had been lost. He could no longer control her, and for a moment he saw the reflection of his own downfall. He tried to speak, but she was no longer listening. And then, in an unexpected move, Cinderella walked away, leaving Adrian there, powerless, while she took control of her own life. After the confrontation at the bookstore, Adrian was stunned. He hadn't been prepared for Cinderella's turnaround. Throughout their time together, he had always believed he had complete control over her. The revelation of his obsession, the fact that he had invaded her life in such an intimate and disturbing way, not only enraged Cinderella, but also set her free. Adrian didn't know how to deal with it. He tried to contact her several times, sending messages, calling insistently, but Cinderella never answered. He didn't understand. How could she reject him? How could she finally realize what he had done? She had always been his, he thought. Adrian's obsession turned into growing anguish. He became increasingly desperate to regain his possession of her. But Cinderella didn't answer. She knew that every time he tried to get close, he wasn't seeking to reconcile their love. He was merely trying to regain control. His confused and violent reaction reflected his inability to accept the loss of his prey. With Adrian out of her life, or at least trying to get out of it, Cinderella felt an unexpected relief. It wasn't pure happiness, but a feeling of release. She was, for the first time in a long time, in control of her own life. But this freedom came at a price. She realized that over the years, her identity had been crushed by Adrian's control. Although she had begun to rebuild her life, Cinderella felt a void, a loss of herself that she knew she needed to fill. The independence she had so desperately sought now seemed strangely distant, an illusion she didn't know how to achieve. Sarah, he was the first person to notice the change in her. One afternoon, while they were having coffee, Sarah noticed Cinderella's different look. The sadness was still there, but there was something more, an aura of resilience. "You're different, Cinderella," Sarah commented. "You seem stronger, but also more distant. How are you feeling?" Cinderella sighed, gazing out the window, the streets of Los Angeles seeming almost alien to her, as if she were a tourist in her own city. "I'm trying to understand who I am without him, and at the same time, I'm afraid of what comes next. I feel empty, Sarah, like I've lost a part of myself all this time." Sarah placed her hand on her friend's shoulder, looking at her with understanding. "You're starting over, my friend. And however difficult it may be, what you're doing now is more important than anything he ever made you believe. Believe in yourself." Cinderella smiled slightly, but she knew the journey was only just beginning. Family pressure also became a difficult reality to ignore. Her aunt, who had always looked up to her as a model of strength, now saw Cinderella's pain as a weakness. When she visited her aunt's house, the conversation took a more tense turn than Cinderella had anticipated. "You have to get over this, Cinderella," her aunt said, with a sternness that only someone who knows the loneliness of a life without affection could understand. "Your mother always believed you would be strong. Don't let this consume you. You need to move on." Cinderella was silent for a moment before finally speaking with a firmness she didn't know she possessed. "I'm not trying to move on, Aunt. I'm trying. Find me. I've spent so many years living in the shadow of other people that I never knew who I really was. And that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to find out who I am." Her aunt looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and apprehension, but Cinderella felt that she had finally taken the first step toward asserting herself. While Cinderella was beginning to take her first steps toward liberation, Adrian was sinking deeper into his own emotional abyss. The obsession he felt for her didn't diminish. On the contrary, it intensified. Cinderella's rejection seemed to threaten his own identity, and he didn't know how to deal with it. He began showing up at the same places she frequented, as if he wanted to ensure she was never free from his presence. But what he didn't understand was that trying to keep Cinderella even closer only pushed her further away. Adrian's obsession had become a burden he himself could no longer bear. He sought advice in places he had previously rejected: therapists, online forums, even self-help books. But nothing seemed to fill the void. He tried to move on, but every time he thought of her, his anger and pain intensified. He had lost control, and he didn't know how to regain it. Cinderella, on the other hand, was learning to live again. She found an inner strength she didn't know she possessed. She decided to seek professional help, work on herself, rebuild friendships and support networks. She started traveling, doing activities she had always wanted to do but never had the courage to do because of Adrian's constant presence. She still felt the pain of losing her mother and of so many years of manipulation, but now she was more prepared to face the future head-on, not without fear, not without difficulties, but with a renewed strength to be who she truly was. Cinderella woke up on a cold autumn morning, feeling lighter than she had in months. The apartment was silent, a reflection of her new state of mind. She was no longer bound by the invisible chains Adrian had built over the years, but as gratifying as the feeling of freedom was, she still carried an inner emptiness, as if a part of herself had been lost along the way. It wasn't a lack of self-love, but a lack of direction. The decision to start over wasn't simple. Doubts still lingered. Can I do this alone? Am I ready to face the world without the weight of the past? But Cinderella knew these questions needed to be confronted, not ignored. She had spent too much time focusing on Adrian, controlling him, and now the real battle was against herself, against the insecurities he had planted in her. For weeks, she immersed herself in therapy, exploring the layers of her identity and the impact that years of toxic relationship had left. What had once seemed like a battle against Adrian now proved to be a battle for finding your true self. As Cinderella searched for answers within herself, her relationships with others began to change. She started to reconnect with old friends, people she had drifted away from over the years. Sarah, who had always been by her side, became one of her main sources of support. However, their relationship also evolved. Before, Sarah had been the friend who saved her from Adrian's clutches, but now she saw Cinderella as stronger, more self-sufficient. Sarah no longer needed to be the protector, but a companion who walked beside her. In a cafe, while they were chatting about life, Sarah said, "I've never seen you so calm, Cinderella. You have something different now, a confidence I've never seen before." Cinderella smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I'm learning to trust myself." The hardest part wasn't leaving Adrian behind, but realizing I'd lost myself in a world where he decided everything for me. Now, I'm rediscovering what I truly want. She knew the recovery process wasn't linear and she would still face ups and downs. But for the first time, she felt like she was in control of her own life, without Adrian's shadow looming over her. A week later, Cinderella met with Daniel, her ex-boyfriend. Their first meeting after so long was awkward, but at the same time revealing. Daniel was there, not to rekindle the romance they had shared in the past, but to understand who Cinderella had become. "You look different," he said with a smile. "I don't know if I can explain it, but you seem more whole." "I'm finally learning to be who I've always been, Daniel," Cinderella replied, her voice firm. "I'm no longer the person I allowed myself to be for so long. I'm focusing on myself now." Daniel nodded, and for a moment, Cinderella felt a sense of peace. She no longer needed Adrian's validation or anyone else's to be who she was. She was beginning to understand that her worth wasn't tied to a relationship, but to the person she was. Despite all her efforts to move on, Adrian's presence still lingered in Cinderella's life. He reappeared, attempting to infiltrate her once more with his manipulations and empty promises. He sought her out at social events, sent messages with apologies that seemed sincere, but always with the same goal: to regain control. "I know I hurt you, Cinderella," he said during one of their forced meetings, "but I love you, and I can change. We can rebuild what we had. I can be the man you always wanted." Cinderella looked at him, not angrily, but with a clarity which she didn't have before. It was no longer a question of revenge or forgiveness. It was a question of decide who she wanted to be. "I don't need you anymore, Adrian," she said calmly, but with a strength that surprised even herself. "I finally understood that the person I was trying to save wasn't you, but myself. I can no longer allow you to destroy my life, no matter how hard you try." She took a step back toward the door, and for the first time felt at peace with her decision. Adrian no longer controlled her. She was book. And that freedom depended on nothing more than the strength she found within herself. The decision to finally cut ties with Adrian brought a sense of renewal to Cinderella. Although the healing process was still ongoing, she knew she could now live authentically. She decided to pursue her own goals, free from the influences of a relationship that had destabilized her for so long. Cinderella began investing more time in her career, her personal projects, and rebuilding her own identity. She started doing what she had always loved: writing, traveling, and connecting with the people around her in a genuine way. Most importantly, she began to cultivate self-love, which he never had before. Now looking back, she saw that period of her life no longer as a prison, but as a stage that led her to a stronger and more self-aware version of herself. The freedom she gained was not only from Adrian, but from the fear and insecurity he had instilled in her. Over time, Adrian grew bolder. He knew Cinderella had begun to rebuild her life, and although he could no longer directly manipulate her actions, he still believed he could win her back, this time in a more cunning way. His behavior became increasingly disturbing. He approached the people around Cinderella, trying to sow doubt about her ability to move on without him. In one of his attempts, he sought out Sarah, trying to disguise the obsession he still felt. "I know you care about her, Sarah, but you don't understand. Cinderella is just trying to convince herself of something that isn't real. She can't be happy without me." Sarah, who had already witnessed Cinderella's transformation, was unmoved. "You don't understand, Adrian," she replied firmly. "She's much better off without you. And if you truly loved her, you would leave her alone. This is obsession, not love." No matter how hard Sarah tried to be assertive, Adrian didn't give up. He continued his manipulative game, but it wasn't long before his behavior became more aggressive, more desperate. He tried one last time to control the pieces on the board, but for him, the clock was ticking against him. Cinderella, for her part, was more prepared than ever for the final confrontation. She had already emotionally distanced herself from Adrian, but still felt the need to completely sever ties, leaving no room for him to infiltrate her life again. The tension she felt, knowing that Adrian was still trying to manipulate the people around her, only increased her determination. In a final meeting, arranged by Adrian at a social event, she realized the final confrontation was about to happen. He appeared with a forced smile, trying to hide the despair that still consumed him. "Cinderella, I love you. I can't live without you. No matter what happened in the past, we can start over. I just need one last chance." Cinderella looked at him, her eyes firm but not angry. "It's no use anymore, Adrian. I've already forgiven you for everything you've done, but that doesn't mean I'll let you continue to control my life. I'm no longer the woman you manipulated. You've lost me." Her response wasn't accompanied by shouting or physical confrontation, but with dignity from someone who finally knew what she wanted. Cinderella walked away without looking back, but with a feeling of silent victory. It wasn't a public triumph, but a personal one. She knew she had made the right choice. Although Adrian had been a chapter in her life, Cinderella still needed to deal with the emotional legacy he left behind. She knew it would be a difficult journey, but she felt more ready to face it than ever. The healing process didn't end with simply separating from Adrian. Cinderella began to seek ways to understand and accept past traumas. She looked for new ways to grow emotionally, and during a therapy session was able to express what she felt without fear of judgment. The work of self-acceptance, it was ongoing, but she knew she was finally giving herself permission to move forward without any more internal barriers. One night, while writing in her diary, she reflected on the journey. "I survived what he did to me, and now it's my turn to live my truth, to become the woman I was always meant to be. I am no longer a victim." She realized that Adrian's liberation wasn't the resolution of the plot, but the beginning of a new life arc for herself. The process of personal healing and growth was only just beginning. Amidst all this transformation, Cinderella began to allow herself to reconnect with the past in a healthy way, and this included her former relationship with Daniel. He, who had always been by her side, now seemed to be someone who, unlike Adrian, respected her. They began to meet more frequently, not to relive the romance they had, but to sharing mutual growth that they both lived. "I always knew you had something incredible inside you, Cinderella," Daniel said in one of their conversations. "You just needed to get rid of the weight of it." "I know," Cinderella replied, smiling, "but now it's different. I am different." They looked at each other for a moment, with no rush to hurry things. The love between them was no longer about possession or need, but about compassion and respect. Cinderella now knew that true love wasn't about who controlled whom, but about growing together as equals. The following night, after a long day at work, Cinderella found herself in front of the mirror. She saw someone stronger, more determined, more genuine than she had ever been before. She was no longer chasing a perfect relationship, nor searching for someone to fill the void she felt. She felt complete within herself. "I'm going to continue with my life," she murmured to herself, feeling the truth of her words. "I am who I need to be now. Nothing else defines me." She smiled at her reflection, knowing she was on the right path. The choices she had made, the battles she had fought, had finally brought her the peace she had so desperately sought. Cinderella was at a corporate event, an elegant gala she had been invited to as part of a project in her new career. The night was dazzling, with twinkling lights and soft music filling the air. She had already begun to enjoy her freedom, but, as always, Adrian was still present in the shadows. She saw him before he saw her. Adrian, with his arrogant posture and familiar smile, was in a corner chatting with some guests, but his eyes were searching for her, as they always did. It was as if he had followed her there, determined to prove that he still had control over her. Cinderella wasn't afraid. She knew what she needed to do. She approached him without hesitation, with a calmness that immediately surprised him. "Adrian," she said, her voice cold but determined, "I know you're trying to infiltrate my life again. I know what you're trying to do." He smiled, but there was something desperate in his eyes. "I'm not trying anything, Cinderella. I just want you to see the truth. I never stopped loving you. We both know this isn't over." She took a deep breath. The atmosphere around her seemed to diminish as she looked directly into his eyes. "You don't love me, Adrian. You never loved me. What you did was manipulate me, control me, and I let you because I didn't know how to get out. But I'm out now, and you need to understand that I'm not yours anymore." The pressure in Cinderella's chest vanished like a dissipating storm. She felt a clarity she had never experienced before. She was ready to deliver the final blow. Adrian approached her, a glint in his eyes. "You can't do this, Cinderella. I'll always be here. I'm the only person who can make you happy." Cinderella looked at him without fear. She knew he was trying to do what he always did, play with her emotions, trying to make her doubt herself. But now she had no more doubts. "No, Adrian. The only game you're playing is trying to destroy me, but you failed. I'm no longer the woman you destroyed. I'm a strong woman who has found her own voice. And you can't control me anymore." The tension between them was palpable, but when she looked at him, Cinderella didn't see the man she feared. She saw only a defeated man, a shadow of who he used to be. He was lost in his own obsession, while she was finally free. Adrian, frustrated, tried to force one last word, but Cinderella already knew what to do. With a sad smile, she turned her back and walked towards the door. "You're not going to do that, Cinderella," he shouted, but his voice no longer had the power it once did. She turned one last time, facing him with firm resolve. "I've already done it, Adrian. I've already done it." And with that, she left the event without looking back, without exchanging any more words. The control he had over her, the power he had wielded over her life for so long, vanished like dust in the wind. She was finally free. Cinderella walked down the street, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. There was no more fear, no more insecurity. She felt complete, and for the first time, with the feeling that she no longer needed anyone to validate her existence. The weight she had carried for so many years, the pain of being lost and controlled, had finally been left behind. The city seemed more alive than ever. The lights, the bustling streets, everything seemed to have a new meaning. She smiled to herself, feeling a quiet peace. She knew that from then on, her life would be written by herself, with no more shadows of the past to obscure her path. She picked up her cell phone and called Sarah, who answered quickly. "Hi, friend. I did it," said Cinderella, her voice filled with emotion. "He can't reach me anymore. I am free." Sarah, on the other end of the line, smiled as she heard the happiness in her friend's voice. "I knew you could do it, Cinderella. You were always stronger than you thought." Cinderella closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of those words. She was strong. She had won. And as the city continued its routine around her, Cinderella knew that the confrontation with Adrian, the final confrontation, had been the last piece of the puzzle in her recovery. The road ahead would be long, but now she was ready to embark on the journey with confidence. Months later, Cinderella continued her life with renewed vigor. She grew significantly, both personally and professionally. Her work thrived, and she found a new purpose. The path to rebuilding wasn't easy, but she now knew who she was, what she wanted, and what she deserved. She reconciled with her past, but didn't let it define her. Cinderella had transformed into a woman who no longer needed a Prince Charming to feel complete. She was the heroine of her own story, and that was more than enough. Cinderella sat in her new home, the apartment she finally considered her own. The view from the window showed the city of Los Angeles at night, illuminated and vibrant, reflecting the energy she now felt within. It was a peace she had never known before, as if the world around her was in harmony with her new self. But looking back, she knew that none of this would have been possible without the long journey of overcoming adversity she had endured. She remembered the difficult times, the painful moments, the constant struggle to break free from Adrian. There was no denying that those years of suffering had left deep scars, but paradoxically, they had also been the catalysts for her transformation. She had found her strength in the darkest moments, and now she felt whole, more than she had ever imagined possible. Cinderella smiled softly to herself. She no longer looked at the past with anger or regret. She accepted it as part of her journey, a necessary step to get where she was now. Cinderella's true victory was emotional freedom. It wasn't just the fact that she had distanced herself from Adrian, but the way she had learned to rediscover. The shadows of the past were behind her, but she didn't see them as something to be erased. They were, in a way, part of the fabric of her identity, shaping the woman she was today. She knew the scars would never completely disappear, but now they didn't define her. They were merely vestiges of a chapter that had been closed. Cinderella was now writing her own story, with chapters of strength, resilience, and ultimately autonomy. She rose from her chair and walked to the balcony, breathing deeply the cool night air. The city seemed both distant and intimate, as if welcoming her back with a new purpose. In her hand, her phone vibrated. A message from Sarah. "You did it, Cinderella. I knew you would be able to transform pain into strength. I can't wait to see you tomorrow and celebrate the incredible woman you've become." Cinderella looked at the message, smiling with gratitude. Sarah had always been by her side, but now she knew she no longer depended on anyone to feel whole. She had found true strength within herself. The future now seemed open and full of possibilities. The shadows of Adrian no longer loomed over her life. There were no more fears, no more traumas controlling her choices. She was ready to follow her path, without further obstacles, without further limitations. Cinderella knew there was still much to learn, much to live, but now she was free to choose her own direction. She finally understood that true freedom didn't come from escaping someone or something, but from finding and embracing what was within herself. She took another step outside, into the world that now belonged to her, and smiled as she felt the cool wind on her face. The city was there, immense, and she was ready to conquer it. Because, more than anything, she knew that the greatest love of her life would always be self-love. Months have passed since that pivotal event, and Cinderella is now living her life to the fullest. She has found a new balance between her career and her relationships, now built on respect and self-love. Adrian, who had completely distanced himself from her life, had become a distant memory, powerless over her. Cinderella had finally become the woman she was always meant to be. She now saw the world with new eyes, full of hope and expectations. The journey of overcoming never truly ends, but she was ready for whatever the future held.